Welcome to Long Stories for Sleep. Just set me playing, relax, and drift off. Subscribe and you'll have a library of stories to choose from. Comment to let me know where in the world you are and what stories you would like added. That's really helpful information. Enough rambling. On with the story.
3 Men in a Boat, to say nothing of the dog. By Jerome K. Jerome. Part 1, read by Long Stories for Sleep. Chapter 1. 3 Invalids. Sufferings of George and Harris. A victim to 107 fatal maladies. Useful prescriptions. Cure for liver complaint in children. We agree that we are overworked and need rest. A week on the rolling deep. George suggests the river. Montmorency lodges an objection. Original motion carried by majority of 3 to 1. There were 4 of us: George, and William Samuel Harris, and myself, and Montmorency. We were sitting in my room, smoking, and talking about how bad we were, bad from a medical point of view, I mean, of course. We were all feeling seedy, and we were getting quite nervous about it. Harris said he felt such extraordinary fits of giddiness come over him at times, that he hardly knew what he was doing, and then George said that he had fits of giddiness too, and hardly knew what he was doing. With me, it was my liver that was out of order. I knew it was my liver that was out of order, because I had just been reading a patent liver pill circular, in which were detailed the various symptoms by which a man could tell when his liver was out of order. I had them all. It is a most extraordinary thing, but I never read a patent medicine advertisement without being impelled to the conclusion that I am suffering from the particular disease therein dealt with in its most virulent form. The diagnosis seems in every case to correspond exactly with all the sensations that I have ever felt. I remember going to the British Museum one day to read up the treatment for some slight ailment of which I had a touch hay fever, I fancy it was. I got down the book, and read all I came to read, and then, in an unthinking moment, I idly turned the leaves, and began to indolently study diseases, generally. I forget which was the first distemper. I plunged into some fearful, devastating scourge, I know, and, before I had glanced half down the list of premonitory symptoms, it was borne in upon me that I had fairly got it. I sat for a while, frozen with horror, and then, in the listlessness of despair, I again turned over the pages. I came to typhoid fever, read the symptoms, discovered that I had typhoid fever, must have had it for months without knowing it, wondered what else I had got, turned up St. Vitus's dance, found, as I expected, that I had that too, began to get interested in my case, and determined to sift it to the bottom, and so started alphabetically, read up ague, and learnt that I was sickening for it, and that the acute stage would commence in about another fortnight. Bright's disease, I was relieved to find, I had only in a modified form, and, so far as that was concerned, I might live for years. Cholera I had, with severe complications, and diphtheria I seemed to have been born with. I plodded conscientiously through the 26 letters, and the only malady I could conclude I had not got was housemaid's knee. I felt rather hurt about this at first. It seemed somehow to be a sort of slight. Why hadn't I got housemaid's knee? Why this invidious reservation? After a while, however, less grasping feelings prevailed. I reflected that I had every other known malady in the pharmacology, and I grew less selfish, and determined to do without housemaid's knee. Gout, in its most malignant stage, it would appear, had seized me without my being aware of it, and zymosis I had evidently been suffering with from boyhood. There were no more diseases after zymosis, so I concluded there was nothing else the matter with me. I sat and pondered. I thought what an interesting case I must be from a medical point of view, what an acquisition I should be to a class. Students would have no need to walk the hospitals, if they had me. I was a hospital in myself. All they need do would be to walk round me, and, after that, take their diploma. Then I wondered how long I had to live. I tried to examine myself. I felt my pulse. I could not at first feel any pulse at all. Then, all of a sudden, it seemed to start off. I pulled out my watch and timed it. I made it 147 to the minute. I tried to feel my heart. I could not feel my heart. It had stopped beating. I have since been induced to come to the opinion that it must have been there all the time, and must have been beating, but I cannot account for it. I patted myself all over my front, from what I call my waist up to my head, and I went a bit round each side, and a little way up the back. But I could not feel or hear anything. I tried to look at my tongue. I stuck it out as far as ever it would go, and I shut one eye, and tried to examine it with the other. I could only see the tip, and the only thing that I could gain from that was to feel more certain than before that I had scarlet fever. I had walked into that reading room a happy, healthy man. I crawled out a decrepit wreck. I went to my medical man. He is an old chum of mine, and feels my pulse, and looks at my tongue, and talks about the weather, all for nothing, when I fancy I'm ill, so I thought I would do him a good turn by going to him now. What a doctor wants, I said, is practice. He shall have me. He will get more practice out of me than out of 1,700 of your ordinary, commonplace patients, with only 1 or 2 diseases each. So I went straight up and saw him, and he said, "Well, what's the matter with you?" I said, "I will not take up your time, dear boy, with telling you what is the matter with me. Life is brief, and you might pass away before I had finished. But I will tell you what is not the matter with me. I have not got housemaid's knee. Why I have not got housemaid's knee, I cannot tell you, but the fact remains that I have not got it. Everything else, however, I have got." And I told him how I came to discover it all. Then he opened me and looked down me, and clutched hold of my wrist, and then he hit me over the chest when I wasn't expecting it, a cowardly thing to do, I call it, and immediately afterwards butted me with the side of his head. After that, he sat down and wrote out a prescription, and folded it up and gave it me, and I put it in my pocket and went out. I did not open it. I took it to the nearest chemist's, and handed it in. The man read it, and then handed it back. He said he didn't keep it. I said, "You are a chemist." He said, "I am a chemist. If I was a cooperative stores and family hotel combined, I might be able to oblige you. Being only a chemist hampers me." I read the prescription. It ran: 1 pound beefsteak, with 1 pint bitter beer. Every 6 hours. 1 10-mile walk every morning. 1 bed at 11 sharp every night. And don't stuff up your head with things you don't understand. I followed the directions, with the happy result speaking for myself that my life was preserved, and is still going on. In the present instance, going back to the liver pill circular, I had the symptoms, beyond all mistake, the chief among them being a general disinclination to work of any kind. What I suffer in that way no tongue can tell. From my earliest infancy I have been a martyr to it. As a boy, the disease hardly ever left me for a day. They did not know, then, that it was my liver. Medical science was in a far less advanced state than now, and they used to put it down to laziness. "Why, you skulking little devil, you," they would say, "get up and do something for your living, can't you?" not knowing, of course, that I was ill. And they didn't give me pills, they gave me clumps on the side of the head. And, strange as it may appear, those clumps on the head often cured me for the time being. I have known one clump on the head have more effect upon my liver, and make me feel more anxious to go straight away then and there, and do what was wanted to be done, without further loss of time, than a whole box of pills does now. You know, it often is so. Those simple, old-fashioned remedies are sometimes more efficacious than all the dispensary stuff. We sat there for half an hour, describing to each other our maladies. I explained to George and William Harris how I felt when I got up in the morning, and William Harris told us how he felt when he went to bed, and George stood on the hearthrug, and gave us a clever and powerful piece of acting, illustrative of how he felt in the night. George fancies he is ill, but there's never anything really the matter with him, you know. At this point, Mrs. Poppets knocked at the door to know if we were ready for supper. We smiled sadly at one another, and said we supposed we had better try to swallow a bit. Harris said a little something in one's stomach often kept the disease in check, and Mrs. Poppets brought the tray in, and we drew up to the table, and toyed with a little steak and onions, and some rhubarb tart. I must have been very weak at the time, because I know, after the first half-hour or so, I seemed to take no interest whatever in my food, an unusual thing for me, and I didn't want any cheese. This duty done, we refilled our glasses, lit our pipes, and resumed the discussion upon our state of health. What it was that was actually the matter with us, we none of us could be sure of, but the unanimous opinion was that whatever it was had been brought on by overwork. "What we want is rest," said Harris. "Rest and a complete change," said George. "The overstrain upon our brains has produced a general depression throughout the system. Change of scene, and absence of the necessity for thought, will restore the mental equilibrium." George has a cousin, who is usually described in the charge sheet as a medical student, so that he naturally has a somewhat family physicianary way of putting things. I agreed with George, and suggested that we should seek out some retired and old-world spot, far from the madding crowd, and dream away a sunny week among its drowsy lanes, some half-forgotten nook, hidden away by the ferries, out of reach of the noisy world, some quaint perched eyrie on the cliffs of time, from whence the surging waves of the 19th century would sound far off and faint. Harris said he thought it would be humpy. He said he knew the sort of place I meant, where everybody went to bed at 8 o'clock, and you couldn't get a referee for love or money, and had to walk 10 miles to get your bocce. "No," said Harris, "if you want rest and change, you can't beat a sea trip." I objected to the sea trip strongly. A sea trip does you good when you are going to have a couple of months of it, but, for a week, it is wicked. You start on Monday with the idea implanted in your bosom that you are going to enjoy yourself. You wave an airy adieu to the boys on shore, light your biggest pipe, and swagger about the deck as if you were Captain Cook, Sir Francis Drake, and Christopher Columbus all rolled into one. On Tuesday, you wish you hadn't come. On Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, you wish you were dead. On Saturday, you are able to swallow a little beef tea, and to sit up on deck, and answer with a wan, sweet smile when kind-hearted people ask you how you feel now. On Sunday, you begin to walk about again, and take solid food. And on Monday morning, as, with your bag and umbrella in your hand, you stand by the gunwale, waiting to step ashore, you begin to thoroughly like it. I remember my brother-in-law going for a short sea trip once, for the benefit of his health. He took a return berth from London to Liverpool, and when he got to Liverpool, the only thing he was anxious about was to sell that return ticket. It was offered round the town at a tremendous reduction, so I am told, and was eventually sold for 18p to a bilious-looking youth who had just been advised by his medical men to go to the seaside, and take exercise. "Seaside," said my brother-in-law, pressing the ticket affectionately into his hand, "why, you'll have enough to last you a lifetime, and as for exercise, why, you'll get more exercise, sitting down on that ship, than you would turning somersaults on dry land." He himself, my brother-in-law, came back by train. He said the Northwestern Railway was healthy enough for him. Another fellow I knew went for a week's voyage round the coast, and, before they started, the steward came to him to ask whether he would pay for each meal as he had it, or arrange beforehand for the whole series. The steward recommended the latter course, as it would come so much cheaper. He said they would do him for the whole week at £2.5. He said for breakfast there would be fish, followed by a grill. Lunch was at 1, and consisted of 4 courses. Dinner at 6 soup, fish, entree, joint, poultry, salad, sweets, cheese, and dessert. And a light meat supper at 10. My friend thought he would close on the £2.5 job. He is a hearty eater, and did so. Lunch came just as they were off Sheerness. He didn't feel so hungry as he thought he should, and so contented himself with a bit of boiled beef, and some strawberries and cream. He pondered a good deal during the afternoon, and at one time it seemed to him that he had been eating nothing but boiled beef for weeks, and at other times it seemed that he must have been living on strawberries and cream for years. Neither the beef nor the strawberries and cream seemed happy, either seemed discontented-like. At 6, they came and told him dinner was ready. The announcement aroused no enthusiasm within him, but he felt that there was some of that £2.5 to be worked off, and he held on to ropes and things and went down. A pleasant odor of onions and hot ham, mingled with fried fish and greens, greeted him at the bottom of the ladder, and then the steward came up with an oily smile, and said, "What can I get you, sir?" "Get me out of this," was the feeble reply. And they ran him up quick, and propped him up, over to leeward, and left him. For the next 4 days he lived a simple and blameless life on thin captain's biscuits. I mean that the biscuits were thin, not the captain, and soda water, but, towards Saturday, he got uppish, and went in for weak tea and dry toast, and on Monday he was gorging himself on chicken broth. He left the ship on Tuesday, and as it steamed away from the landing stage he gazed after it regretfully. "There she goes," he said, "there she goes, with £2 worth of food on board that belongs to me, and that I haven't had." He said that if they had given him another day he thought he could have put it straight. So I set my face against the sea trip. Not, as I explained, upon my own account. I was never queer. But I was afraid for George. George said he should be all right, and would rather like it, but he would advise Harris and me not to think of it, as he felt sure we should both be ill. Harris said that, to himself, it was always a mystery how people managed to get sick at sea. Said he thought people must do it on purpose, from affectation. Said he had often wished to be, but had never been able. Then he told us anecdotes of how he had gone across the channel when it was so rough that the passengers had to be tied into their berths, and he and the captain were the only 2 living souls on board who were not ill. Sometimes it was he and the second mate who were not ill, but it was generally he and one other man. If not he and another man, then it was he by himself. It is a curious fact, but nobody ever is seasick on land. At sea, you come across plenty of people very bad indeed, whole boatloads of them, but I never met a man yet, on land, who had ever known at all what it was to be seasick. Where the thousands upon thousands of bad sailors that swarm in every ship hide themselves when they are on land is a mystery. If most men were like a fellow I saw on the Yarmouth boat one day, I could account for the seeming enigma easily enough. It was just off Southend Pier, I recollect, and he was leaning out through one of the portholes in a very dangerous position. I went up to him to try and save him. "Hi! Come further in," I said, shaking him by the shoulder. "You'll be overboard." "Oh my! I wish I was the only answer I could get, and there I had to leave him. 3 weeks afterwards, I met him in the coffee room of a Bath hotel, talking about his voyages, and explaining, with enthusiasm, how he loved the sea. "Good sailor," he replied in answer to a mild young man's envious query, "well, I did feel a little queer once, I confess. It was off Cape Horn. The vessel was wrecked the next morning." I said, "Weren't you a little shaky by Southend Pier one day, and wanted to be thrown overboard?" "Southend Pier," he replied, with a puzzled expression. "Yes, going down to Yarmouth, last Friday 3 weeks. "Oh, ah yes," he answered, brightening up, "I remember now. I did have a headache that afternoon. It was the pickles, you know. They were the most disgraceful pickles I ever tasted in a respectable boat. Did you have any?" For myself, I have discovered an excellent preventive against seasickness, in balancing myself. You stand in the center of the deck, and, as the ship heaves and pitches, you move your body about, so as to keep it always straight. When the front of the ship rises, you lean forward, till the deck almost touches your nose, and when its back end gets up, you lean backwards. This is all very well for an hour or two, but you can't balance yourself for a week. George said, "Let's go up the river." He said we should have fresh air, exercise and quiet. The constant change of scene would occupy our minds, including what there was of Harris's, and the hard work would give us a good appetite, and make us sleep well. Harris said he didn't think George ought to do anything that would have a tendency to make him sleepier than he always was, as it might be dangerous. He said he didn't very well understand how George was going to sleep any more than he did now, seeing that there were only 24 hours in each day, summer and winter alike, but thought that if he did sleep any more, he might just as well be dead, and so save his board and lodging. Harris said, however, that the river would suit him to a T. I don't know what a tea is, except a sixpenny one, which includes bread and butter and cake ad lib, and is cheap at the price, if you haven't had any dinner. It seems to suit everybody, however, which is greatly to its credit. It suited me to a T too, and Harris and I both said it was a good idea of George's, and we said it in a tone that seemed to somehow imply that we were surprised that George should have come out so sensible. The only one who was not struck with the suggestion was Montmorency. He never did care for the river, did Montmorency. "It's all very well for you fellows," he says, "you like it, but I don't. There's nothing for me to do. Scenery is not in my line, and I don't smoke. If I see a rat, you won't stop, and if I go to sleep, you get fooling about with the boat, and slop me overboard. If you ask me, I call the whole thing bally foolishness." We were 3-1, however, and the motion was carried. Chapter 2. Plans discussed. Pleasures of camping out, on fine nights. Ditto, wet nights. Compromise decided on. Montmorency, first impressions of. Fears lest he is too good for this world, fears subsequently dismissed as groundless. Meeting adjourns. We pulled out the maps, and discussed plans. We arranged to start on the following Saturday from Kingston. Harris and I would go down in the morning, and take the boat up to Chertsey, and George, who would not be able to get away from the city till the afternoon, George goes to sleep at a bank from 10 to 4 each day, except Saturdays, when they wake him up and put him outside at 2, would meet us there. Should we camp out or sleep at inns? George and I were for camping out. We said it would be so wild and free, so patriarchal-like. Slowly the golden memory of the dead sun fades from the hearts of the cold, sad clouds. Silent, like sorrowing children, the birds have ceased their song, and only the moorhen's plaintive cry and the harsh croak of the corncrake stirs the awed hush around the couch of waters, where the dying day breathes out her last. From the dim woods on either bank, night's ghostly army, the gray shadows, creep out with noiseless tread to chase away the lingering rearguard of the light, and pass, with noiseless, unseen feet, above the waving river grass, and through the sighing rushes, and night, upon her somber throne, folds her black wings above the darkening world, and, from her phantom palace, lit by the pale stars, reigns in stillness. Then we run our little boat into some quiet nook, and the tent is pitched, and the frugal supper cooked and eaten. Then the big pipes are filled and lighted, and the pleasant chat goes round in musical undertone, while, in the pauses of our talk, the river, playing round the boat, prattles strange old tales and secrets, sings low the old child's song that it has sung so many thousand years will sing so many thousand years to come, before its voice grows harsh and old, a song that we, who have learnt to love its changing face, who have so often nestled on its yielding bosom, think, somehow, we understand. Though we could not tell you in mere words the story that we listen to. And we sit there, by its margin, while the moon, who loves it too, stoops down to kiss it with a sister's kiss, and throws her silver arms around it clingingly, and we watch it as it flows, ever singing, ever whispering, out to meet its king, the sea, till our voices die away in silence, and the pipes go out till we, commonplace, everyday young men enough, feel strangely full of thoughts, half sad, half sweet, and do not care or want to speak till we laugh, and, rising, knock the ashes from our burnt-out pipes, and say good night, and, lulled by the lapping water and the rustling trees, we fall asleep beneath the great, still stars, and dream that the world is young again, young and sweet as she used to be ere the centuries of fret and care had furrowed her fair face, ere her children's sins and follies had made old her loving heart, sweet as she was in those bygone days when, a new-made mother, she nursed us, her children, upon her own deep breast ere the wiles of painted civilization had lured us away from her fond arms, and the poisoned sneers of artificiality had made us ashamed of the simple life we led with her, and the simple, stately home where mankind was born so many thousands years ago. Harris said. How about when it rained? You can never rouse Harris. There is no poetry about Harris, no wild yearning for the unattainable. Harris never weeps, he knows not why. If Harris's eyes fill with tears, you can bet it is because Harris has been eating raw onions, or has put too much Worcester over his chop. If you were to stand at night by the seashore with Harris, and say, "Hark! Do you not hear? Is it but the mermaids singing deep below the waving waters, or sad spirits, chanting dirges for white corpses, held by seaweed?" Harris would take you by the arm, and say, "I know what it is, old man, you've got a chill. Now, you come along with me. I know a place round the corner here, where you can get a drop of the finest Scotch whiskey you ever tasted put you right in less than no time." Harris always does know a place round the corner where you can get something brilliant in the drinking line. I believe that if you met Harris up in paradise, supposing such a thing likely, he would immediately greet you with, "So glad you've come, old fellow. I've found a nice place round the corner here, where you can get some really first-class nectar." In the present instance, however, as regarded the camping out, his practical view of the matter came as a very timely hint. Camping out in rainy weather is not pleasant. It is evening. You are wet through, and there is a good 2 inches of water in the boat, and all the things are damp. You find a place on the banks that is not quite so puddly as other places you have seen, and you land and lug out the tent, and 2 of you proceed to fix it. It is soaked and heavy, and it flops about, and tumbles down on you, and clings round your head and makes you mad. The rain is pouring steadily down all the time. It is difficult enough to fix a tent in dry weather. In wet, the task becomes Herculean. Instead of helping you, it seems to you that the other man is simply playing the fool. Just as you get your side beautifully fixed, he gives it a hoist from his end, and spoils it all. Here. What are you up to? You call out. What are you up to? He retorts. Lego, can't you? Don't pull it, you've got it all wrong, you stupid ass, you shout. No, I haven't, he yells back, let go your side. I tell you you've got it all wrong, you roar, wishing that you could get at him, and you give your ropes a lug that pulls all his pegs out. Ah, the bally idiot, you hear him mutter to himself, and then comes a savage haul, and away goes your side. You lay down the mallet and start to go round and tell him what you think about the whole business, and, at the same time, he starts round in the same direction to come and explain his views to you. And you follow each other round and round, swearing at one another, until the tent tumbles down in a heap, and leaves you looking at each other across its ruins, when you both indignantly exclaim, in the same breath, there you are. What did I tell you? Meanwhile the third man, who has been bailing out the boat, and who has spilled the water down his sleeve, and has been cursing away to himself steadily for the last 10 minutes, wants to know what the thundering blazes you're playing at, and why the blarmed tent isn't up yet. At last, somehow or other, it does get up, and you land the things. It is hopeless attempting to make a wood fire, so you light the methylated spirit stove, and crowd round that. Rainwater is the chief article of diet at supper. The bread is 2/3 rainwater, the beefsteak pie is exceedingly rich in it, and the jam, and the butter, and the salt, and the coffee have all combined with it to make soup. After supper, you find your tobacco is damp, and you cannot smoke. Luckily you have a bottle of the stuff that cheers and inebriates, if taken in proper quantity, and this restores to you sufficient interest in life to induce you to go to bed. There you dream that an elephant has suddenly sat down on your chest, and that the volcano has exploded and thrown you down to the bottom of the sea, the elephant still sleeping peacefully on your bosom. You wake up and grasp the idea that something terrible really has happened. Your first impression is that the end of the world has come, and then you think that this cannot be, and that it is thieves and murderers, or else fire, and this opinion you express in the usual method. No help comes, however, and all you know is that thousands of people are kicking you, and you are being smothered. Somebody else seems in trouble, too. You can hear his faint cries coming from underneath your bed. Determining, at all events, to sell your life dearly, you struggle frantically, hitting out right and left with arms and legs, and yelling lustily the while, and at last something gives way, and you find your head in the fresh air. 2 feet off, you dimly observe a half-dressed ruffian, waiting to kill you, and you are preparing for a life-and-death struggle with him, when it begins to dawn upon you that it's Jim. "Oh, it's you, is it?" he says, recognizing you at the same moment. "Yes," you answer, rubbing your eyes. "What's happened?" "Bally tent's blown down, I think," he says. "Where's Bill?" Then you both raise up your voices and shout for Bill, and the ground beneath you heaves and rocks, and the muffled voice that you heard before replies from out the ruin. "Get off my head, can't you?" And Bill struggles out, a muddy, trampled wreck, and in an unnecessarily aggressive mood, he being under the evident belief that the whole thing has been done on purpose. In the morning you are all three speechless, owing to having caught severe colds in the night. You also feel very quarrelsome, and you swear at each other in hoarse whispers during the whole of breakfast time. We therefore decided that we would sleep out on fine nights, and hotel it, and inn it, and pub it, like respectable folks, when it was wet, or when we felt inclined for a change. Montmorency hailed this compromise with much approval. He does not revel in romantic solitude. Give him something noisy, and if a trifle low, so much the jollier. To look at Montmorency you would imagine that he was an angel sent upon the earth, for some reason withheld from mankind, in the shape of a small fox terrier. There is a sort of "oh what a wicked world this is and how I wish I could do something to make it better and nobler" expression about Montmorency that has been known to bring the tears into the eyes of pious old ladies and gentlemen. When first he came to live at my expense, I never thought I should be able to get him to stop long. I used to sit down and look at him, as he sat on the rug and looked up at me, and think, oh, that dog will never live. He will be snatched up to the bright skies in a chariot, that is what will happen to him. But, when I had paid for about a dozen chickens that he had killed, and had dragged him, growling and kicking, by the scruff of his neck, out of 114 street fights, and had had a dead cat brought round for my inspection by an irate female, who called me a murderer, and had been summoned by the men next door but one for having a ferocious dog at large, that had kept him pinned up in his own tool-shed, afraid to venture his nose outside the door for over 2 hours on a cold night, and had learned that the gardener, unknown to myself, had won 30 shillings by backing him to kill rats against time, then I began to think that maybe they'd let him remain on earth for a bit longer, after all. To hang about a stable, and collect a gang of the most disreputable dogs to be found in the town, and lead them out to march round the slums to fight other disreputable dogs, is Montmorency's idea of life, and so, as I before observed, he gave to the suggestion of inns, and pubs, and hotels his most emphatic approbation. Having thus settled the sleeping arrangements to the satisfaction of all 4 of us, the only thing left to discuss was what we should take with us, and this we had begun to argue, when Harris said he'd had enough oratory for one night, and proposed that we should go out and have a smile, saying that he had found a place, round by the square, where you could really get a drop of Irish worth drinking. George said he felt thirsty. I never knew George when he didn't, and, as I had a presentiment that a little whiskey, warm, with a slice of lemon, would do my complaint good, the debate was, by common assent, adjourned to the following night, and the assembly put on its hats and went out. Chapter 3. Arrangements settled. Harris's method of doing work. How the elderly familyman puts up a picture. George makes a sensible remark. Delights of early morning bathing. Provisions for getting upset. So, on the following evening, we again assembled, to discuss and arrange our plans. Harris said, "Now, the first thing to settle is what to take with us. Now, you get a bit of paper and write down, J, and you get the grocery catalogue, George, and somebody give me a bit of pencil, and then I'll make out a list." That's Harris all over, so ready to take the burden of everything himself, and put it on the backs of other people. He always reminds me of my poor Uncle Podger. You never saw such a commotion up and down a house, in all your life, as when my Uncle Podger undertook to do a job. A picture would have come home from the frame maker's, and be standing in the dining room, waiting to be put up, and Aunt Podger would ask what was to be done with it, and Uncle Podger would say, "Oh, you leave that to me. Don't you, any of you, worry yourselves about that. I'll do all that." And then he would take off his coat, and begin. He would send the girl out for 6 of nails, and then one of the boys after her to tell her what size to get, and, from that, he would gradually work down, and start the whole house. "Now you go and get me my hammer, Will," he would shout, "and you bring me the rule, Tom, and I shall want the step-ladder, and I had better have a kitchen chair, too, and, Jim, you run round to Mr. Goggles, and tell him, Pa's kind regards, and hopes his leg's better, and will he lend him his spirit level. And don't you go, Maria, because I shall want somebody to hold me the light, and when the girl comes back, she must go out again for a bit of picture cord, and Tom." "Where's Tom?" "Tom, you come here, I shall want you to hand me up the picture." And then he would lift up the picture, and drop it, and it would come out of the frame, and he would try to save the glass, and cut himself, and then he would spring round the room, looking for his handkerchief. He could not find his handkerchief, because it was in the pocket of the coat he had taken off, and he did not know where he had put the coat, and all the house had to leave off looking for his tools, and start looking for his coat, while he would dance round and hinder them. Doesn't anybody in the whole house know where my coat is? I never came across such a set in all my life, upon my word I didn't. 6 of you. And you can't find a coat that I put down not 5 minutes ago. Well, of all the... Then he'd get up, and find that he had been sitting on it, and would call out, "Oh, you can give it up. I've found it myself now." Might just as well ask the cat to find anything as expect you people to find it. And, when half an hour had been spent in tying up his finger, and a new glass had been got, and the tools, and the ladder, and the chair, and the candle had been brought, he would have another go, the whole family, including the girl and the charwoman, standing round in a semicircle, ready to help. 2 people would have to hold the chair, and a third would help him up on it, and hold him there, and a fourth would hand him a nail, and a fifth would pass him up the hammer, and he would take hold of the nail, and drop it. "There," he would say, in an injured tone, "now the nail's gone." And we would all have to go down on our knees and grovel for it, while he would stand on the chair, and grunt, and want to know if he was to be kept there all the evening. The nail would be found at last, but by that time he would have lost the hammer. Where's the hammer? What did I do with the hammer? Great heavens! 7 of you, gaping round there, and you don't know what I did with the hammer. We would find the hammer for him, and then he would have lost sight of the mark he had made on the wall, where the nail was to go in, and each of us had to get up on the chair, beside him, and see if we could find it, and we would each discover it in a different place, and he would call us all fools, one after another, and tell us to get down. And he would take the rule, and remeasure, and find that he wanted half 31 3/8 inches from the corner, and would try to do it in his head, and go mad. And we would all try to do it in our heads, and all arrive at different results, and sneer at one another. And in the general row, the original number would be forgotten, and Uncle Podger would have to measure it again. He would use a bit of string this time, and at the critical moment, when the old fool was leaning over the chair at an angle of 45, and trying to reach a point 3 inches beyond what was possible for him to reach, the string would slip, and down he would slide onto the piano, a really fine musical effect being produced by the suddenness with which his head and body struck all the notes at the same time. And Aunt Maria would say that she would not allow the children to stand round and hear such language. At last, Uncle Podger would get the spot fixed again, and put the point of the nail on it with his left hand, and take the hammer in his right hand. And, with the first blow, he would smash his thumb, and drop the hammer, with a yell, on somebody's toes. Aunt Maria would mildly observe that, next time Uncle Podger was going to hammer a nail into the wall, she hoped he'd let her know in time, so that she could make arrangements to go and spend a week with her mother while it was being done. "Oh, you women, you make such a fuss over everything," Uncle Podger would reply, picking himself up. "Why, I like doing a little job of this sort." And then he would have another try, and, at the second blow, the nail would go clean through the plaster, and half the hammer after it, and Uncle Podger be precipitated against the wall with force nearly sufficient to flatten his nose. Then we had to find the rule and the string again, and a new hole was made, and, about midnight, the picture would be up very crooked and insecure, the wall for yards round looking as if it had been smoothed down with a rake, and everybody dead beat and wretched except Uncle Podger. "There you are," he would say, stepping heavily off the chair onto the charwoman's corns, and surveying the mess he had made with evident pride. "Why, some people would have had a man in to do a little thing like that. Harris will be just that sort of man when he grows up, I know, and I told him so. I said I could not permit him to take so much labor upon himself. I said, "No, you get the paper, and the pencil, and the catalogue, and George write down, and I'll do the work." The first list we made out had to be discarded. It was clear that the upper reaches of the Thames would not allow of the navigation of a boat sufficiently large to take the things we had set down as indispensable, so we tore the list up, and looked at one another. George said, "You know we are on a wrong track altogether. We must not think of the things we could do with, but only of the things that we can't do without." George comes out really quite sensible at times. You'd be surprised. I call that downright wisdom, not merely as regards the present case, but with reference to our trip up the river of life, generally. How many people, on that voyage, load up the boat till it is ever in danger of swamping with a store of foolish things which they think essential to the pleasure and comfort of the trip, but which are really only useless lumber? How they pile the poor little craft mast-high with fine clothes and big houses, with useless servants, and a host of swell friends that do not care twopence for them, and that they do not care 3 ha'pence for, with expensive entertainments that nobody enjoys, with formalities and fashions, with pretense and ostentation, and with, heaviest, maddest lumber of all, the dread of what will my neighbor think, with luxuries that only cloy, with pleasures that bore, with empty show that, like the criminal's iron crown of yore, makes to bleed and swoon the aching head that wears it. It is lumber, man, all lumber. Throw it overboard. It makes the boat so heavy to pull, you nearly faint at the oars. It makes it so cumbersome and dangerous to manage, you never know a moment's freedom from anxiety and care, never gain a moment's rest for dreamy laziness, no time to watch the windy shadows skimming lightly o'er the shallows, or the glittering sunbeams flitting in and out among the ripples, or the great trees by the margin looking down at their own image, or the woods all green and golden, or the lilies white and yellow, or the somber waving rushes, or the sedges, or the orchis, or the blue forget-me-nots. Throw the lumber over, man. Let your boat of life be light, packed with only what you need: a homely home and simple pleasures, 1 or 2 friends, worth the name, someone to love and someone to love you, a cat, a dog, and a pipe or 2, enough to eat and enough to wear, and a little more than enough to drink, for thirst is a dangerous thing. You will find the boat easier to pull then, and it will not be so liable to upset, and it will not matter so much if it does upset. Good, plain merchandise will stand water. You will have time to think as well as to work. Time to drink in life's sunshine, time to listen to the Aeolian music that the wind of God draws from the human heartstrings around us, time to— I beg your pardon, really. I quite forgot. Well, we left the list to George, and he began it. We won't take a tent, suggested George, we will have a boat with a cover. It is ever so much simpler, and more comfortable. It seemed a good thought, and we adopted it. I do not know whether you have ever seen the thing I mean. You fix iron hoops up over the boat, and stretch a huge canvas over them, and fasten it down all round, from stem to stern, and it converts the boat into a sort of little house, and it is beautifully cozy, though a trifle stuffy, but there, everything has its drawbacks, as the man said when his mother-in-law died, and they came down upon him for the funeral expenses. George said that in that case we must take a rug each, a lamp, some soap, a brush and comb, between us, a toothbrush, each, a basin, some tooth powder, some shaving tackle, sounds like a French exercise, doesn't it, and a couple of big towels for bathing. I notice that people always make gigantic arrangements for bathing when they are going anywhere near the water, but that they don't bathe much when they are there. It is the same when you go to the seaside. I always determine when thinking over the matter in London that I'll get up early every morning, and go and have a dip before breakfast, and I religiously pack up a pair of drawers and a bath towel. I always get red bathing drawers. I rather fancy myself in red drawers. They suit my complexion so. But when I get to the sea, I don't feel somehow that I want that early morning bathe nearly so much as I did when I was in town. On the contrary, I feel more that I want to stop in bed till the last moment, and then come down and have my breakfast. Once or twice virtue has triumphed, and I have got out at 6 and half-dressed myself, and have taken my drawers and towel, and stumbled dismally off. But I haven't enjoyed it. They seem to keep a specially cutting east wind, waiting for me, when I go to bathe in the early morning, and they pick out all the three-cornered stones, and put them on the top, and they sharpen up the rocks and cover the points over with a bit of sand so that I can't see them, and they take the sea and put it 2 miles out, so that I have to huddle myself up in my arms and hop, shivering, through 6 inches of water. And when I do get to the sea, it is rough and quite insulting. One huge wave catches me up and chucks me in a sitting posture, as hard as ever it can, down onto a rock which has been put there for me. And, before I've said, oh, ugh, and found out what has gone, the wave comes back and carries me out to mid-ocean. I begin to strike out frantically for the shore, and wonder if I shall ever see home and friends again, and wish I'd been kinder to my little sister when I was a boy, I mean. Just when I have given up all hope, a wave retires and leaves me sprawling like a starfish on the sand, and I get up and look back and find that I've been swimming for my life in 2 feet of water. I hop back and dress, and crawl home, where I have to pretend I liked it. In the present instance, we all talked as if we were going to have a long swim every morning. George said it was so pleasant to wake up in the boat in the fresh morning, and plunge into the limpid river. Harris said there was nothing like a swim before breakfast to give you an appetite. He said it always gave him an appetite. George said that if it was going to make Harris eat more than Harris ordinarily ate, then he should protest against Harris having a bath at all. He said there would be quite enough hard work in towing sufficient food for Harris up against stream, as it was. I urged upon George, however, how much pleasanter it would be to have Harris clean and fresh about the boat, even if we did have to take a few more hundredweight of provisions, and he got to see it in my light, and withdrew his opposition to Harris's bath. Agreed, finally, that we should take 3 bath towels, so as not to keep each other waiting. For clothes, George said 2 suits of flannel would be sufficient, as we could wash them ourselves, in the river, when they got dirty. We asked him if he had ever tried washing flannels in the river, and he replied, no, not exactly himself-like, but he knew some fellows who had, and it was easy enough, and Harris and I were weak enough to fancy he knew what he was talking about, and that 3 respectable young men, without position or influence, and with no experience in washing, could really clean their own shirts and trousers in the River Thames with a bit of soap. We were to learn in the days to come, when it was too late, that George was a miserable impostor, who could evidently have known nothing whatever about the matter. If you had seen these clothes after but, as the shilling shockers say, we anticipate. George impressed upon us to take a change of underthings and plenty of socks, in case we got upset and wanted a change, also plenty of handkerchiefs, as they would do to wipe things, and a pair of leather boots as well as our boating shoes, as we should want them if we got upset. Chapter 4. The Food Question. Objections to paraffin oil as an atmosphere. Advantages of cheese as a traveling companion. A married woman deserts her home. Further provision for getting upset. I pack. Cussedness of toothbrushes. George and Harris pack. Awful behavior of Montmorency. We retire to rest. Then we discuss the food question. George said, begin with breakfast. George is so practical. Now for breakfast we shall want a frying pan. Harris said it was indigestible, but we merely urged him not to be an ass, and George went on, a teapot and a kettle, and a methylated spirit stove. No oil, said George, with a significant look, and Harris and I agreed. We had taken up an oil stove once, but never again. It had been like living in an oil shop that week. It oozed. I never saw such a thing as paraffin oil is to ooze. We kept it in the nose of the boat, and, from there, it oozed down to the rudder, impregnating the whole boat and everything in it on its way, and it oozed over the river, and saturated the scenery and spoilt the atmosphere. Sometimes a westerly oily wind blew, and at other times an easterly oily wind, and sometimes it blew a northerly oily wind, and maybe a southerly oily wind, but whether it came from the Arctic snows, or was raised in the waste of the desert sands, it came alike to us laden with the fragrance of paraffin oil. And that oil oozed up and ruined the sunset, and as for the moonbeams, they positively reeked of paraffin. We tried to get away from it at Marlow. We left the boat by the bridge, and took a walk through the town to escape it, but it followed us. The whole town was full of oil. We passed through the churchyard, and it seemed as if the people had been buried in oil. The high street stunk of oil, we wondered how people could live in it. And we walked miles upon miles out Birmingham way, but it was no use, the country was steeped in oil. At the end of that trip we met together at midnight in a lonely field, under a blasted oak, and took an awful oath. We had been swearing for a whole week about the thing in an ordinary, middle-class way, but this was a swell affair, an awful oath never to take paraffin oil with us in a boat again except, of course, in case of sickness. Therefore, in the present instance, we confined ourselves to methylated spirit. Even that is bad enough. You get methylated pie and methylated cake. But methylated spirit is more wholesome when taken into the system in large quantities than paraffin oil. For other breakfast things, George suggested eggs and bacon, which were easy to cook, cold meat, tea, bread and butter, and jam. For lunch, he said, we could have biscuits, cold meat, bread and butter, and jam but no cheese. Cheese, like oil, makes too much of itself. It wants the whole boat to itself. It goes through the hamper, and gives a cheesy flavor to everything else there. You can't tell whether you are eating apple pie or German sausage, or strawberries and cream. It all seems cheese. There is too much odor about cheese. I remember a friend of mine buying a couple of cheeses at Liverpool. Splendid cheeses they were, ripe and mellow, and with a 200 horsepower scent about them that might have been warranted to carry 3 miles, and knock a man over at 200 yards. I was in Liverpool at the time, and my friend said that if I didn't mind he would get me to take them back with me to London, as he should not be coming up for a day or two himself, and he did not think the cheeses ought to be kept much longer. "Oh, with pleasure, dear boy," I replied, "with pleasure." I called for the cheeses, and took them away in a cab. It was a ramshackle affair, dragged along by a knock-kneed, broken-winded somnambulist, which his owner, in a moment of enthusiasm, during conversation, referred to as a horse. I put the cheeses on the top, and we started off at a shamble that would have done credit to the swiftest steamroller ever built, and all went merry as a funeral bell, until we turned the corner. There, the wind carried a whiff from the cheeses full onto our steed. It woke him up, and, with a snort of terror, he dashed off at 3 miles an hour. The wind still blew in his direction, and before we reached the end of the street he was laying himself out at the rate of nearly 4 miles an hour, leaving the cripples and stout old lady simply nowhere. It took 2 porters as well as the driver to hold him in at the station, and I do not think they would have done it, even then, had not one of the men had the presence of mind to put a handkerchief over his nose, and to light a bit of brown paper. I took my ticket, and marched proudly up the platform, with my cheeses, the people falling back respectfully on either side. The train was crowded, and I had to get into a carriage where there were already 7 other people. One crusty old gentleman objected, but I got in, notwithstanding, and, putting my cheeses upon the rack, squeezed down with a pleasant smile, and said it was a warm day. A few moments passed, and then the old gentleman began to fidget. "Very close in here," he said. "Quite oppressive," said the man next him. And then they both began sniffing, and, at the 3rd sniff, they caught it right on the chest, and rose up without another word and went out. And then a stout lady got up, and said it was disgraceful that a respectable married woman should be harried about in this way, and gathered up a bag and 8 parcels and went. The remaining 4 passengers sat on for a while, until a solemn-looking man in the corner, who, from his dress and general appearance, seemed to belong to the undertaker class, said it put him in mind of dead baby, and the other 3 passengers tried to get out of the door at the same time, and hurt themselves. I smiled at the black gentleman, and said I thought we were going to have the carriage to ourselves, and he laughed pleasantly, and said that some people made such a fuss over a little thing. But even he grew strangely depressed after we had started, and so, when we reached Crewe, I asked him to come and have a drink. He accepted, and we forced our way into the buffet, where we yelled, and stamped, and waved our umbrellas for a quarter of an hour, and then a young lady came, and asked us if we wanted anything. "What's yours?" I said, turning to my friend. "I'll have half a crown's worth of brandy, neat, if you please, miss," he responded. And he went off quietly after he had drunk it and got into another carriage, which I thought mean. From Crewe I had the compartment to myself, though the train was crowded. As we drew up at the different stations, the people, seeing my empty carriage, would rush for it. "Here why are, Maria, come along, plenty of room." "All right, Tom, we'll get in here," they would shout. And they would run along, carrying heavy bags, and fight round the door to get in first. And one would open the door and mount the steps, and stagger back into the arms of the men behind him, and they would all come and have a sniff, and then droop off and squeeze into other carriages, or pay the difference and go first. From Euston, I took the cheeses down to my friend's house. When his wife came into the room she smelt round for an instant. Then she said, "What is it? Tell me the worst." I said, "It's cheeses. Tom bought them in Liverpool, and asked me to bring them up with me." And I added that I hoped she understood that it had nothing to do with me, and she said that she was sure of that, but that she would speak to Tom about it when he came back. My friend was detained in Liverpool longer than he expected, and, 3 days later, as he hadn't returned home, his wife called on me. She said, "What did Tom say about those cheeses?" I replied that he had directed they were to be kept in a moist place, and that nobody was to touch them. She said, "Nobody's likely to touch them." Had he smelt them? I thought he had, and added that he seemed greatly attached to them. "You think he would be upset," she queried, "if I gave a man a sovereign to take them away and bury them?" I answered that I thought he would never smile again. An idea struck her. She said, "Do you mind keeping them for him? Let me send them round to you." "Madam," I replied, "for myself I like the smell of cheese, and the journey the other day with them from Liverpool I shall ever look back upon as a happy ending to a pleasant holiday. But, in this world, we must consider others. The lady under whose roof I have the honor of residing is a widow, and, for all I know, possibly an orphan too. She has a strong, I may say an eloquent, objection to being what she terms put upon. The presence of your husband's cheeses in her house she would, I instinctively feel, regard as a put upon, and it shall never be said that I put upon the widow and the orphan. Very well, then, said my friend's wife, rising, all I have to say is, that I shall take the children and go to an hotel until those cheeses are eaten. I decline to live any longer in the same house with them. She kept her word, leaving the place in charge of the charwoman, who, when asked if she could stand the smell, replied, "What smell?" and who, when taken close to the cheeses and told to sniff hard, said she could detect a faint odor of melons. It was argued from this that little injury could result to the woman from the atmosphere, and she was left. The hotel bill came to 15 guineas, and my friend, after reckoning everything up, found that the cheeses had cost him 8 and 6 a pound. He said he dearly loved a bit of cheese, but it was beyond his means, so he determined to get rid of them. He threw them into the canal, but had to fish them out again, as the bargemen complained. They said it made them feel quite faint. And, after that, he took them one dark night and left them in the parish mortuary. But the coroner discovered them, and made a fearful fuss. He said it was a plot to deprive him of his living by waking up the corpses. My friend got rid of them, at last, by taking them down to a seaside town, and burying them on the beach. It gained the place quite a reputation. Visitors said they had never noticed before how strong the air was, and weak-chested and consumptive people used to throng there for years afterwards. Fond as I am of cheese, therefore, I hold that George was right in declining to take any. "We shan't want any tea," said George. Harris's face fell at this, "but we'll have a good round, square, slap-up meal at 7 dinner, tea, and supper combined." Harris grew more cheerful. George suggested meat and fruit pies, cold meat, tomatoes, fruit, and green stuff. For drink, we took some wonderful sticky concoction of Harris's, which he mixed with water and called lemonade, plenty of tea, and a bottle of whiskey, in case, as George said, we got upset. It seemed to me that George harped too much on the getting upset idea. It seemed to me the wrong spirit to go about the trip in. But I'm glad we took the whiskey. We didn't take beer or wine. They are a mistake up the river. They make you feel sleepy and heavy. A glass in the evening when you are doing a mooch round the town and looking at the girls is all right enough, but don't drink when the sun is blazing down on your head, and you've got hard work to do. We made a list of the things to be taken, and a pretty lengthy one it was, before we parted that evening. The next day, which was Friday, we got them all together, and met in the evening to pack. We got a big Gladstone for the clothes, and a couple of hampers for the victuals and the cooking utensils. We moved the table up against the window, piled everything in a heap in the middle of the floor, and sat round and looked at it. I said I'd pack. I rather pride myself on my packing. Packing is one of those many things that I feel I know more about than any other person living. It surprises me myself, sometimes, how many of these subjects there are. I impressed the fact upon George and Harris, and told them that they had better leave the whole matter entirely to me. They fell into the suggestion with a readiness that had something uncanny about it. George put on a pipe and spread himself over the easy chair, and Harris cocked his legs on the table and lit a cigar. This was hardly what I intended. What I had meant, of course, was that I should boss the job, and that Harris and George should potter about under my directions, I pushing them aside every now and then with, "Oh, you. Here, let me do it." There you are, simple enough, really teaching them, as you might say. Their taking it in the way they did irritated me. There is nothing does irritate me more than seeing other people sitting about doing nothing when I'm working. I lived with a man once who used to make me mad that way. He would loll on the sofa and watch me doing things by the hour together, following me round the room with his eyes, wherever I went. He said it did him real good to look on at me, messing about. He said it made him feel that life was not an idle dream to be gaped and yawned through, but a noble task, full of duty and stern work. He said he often wondered now how he could have gone on before he met me, never having anybody to look at while they worked. Now, I'm not like that. I can't sit still and see another man slaving and working. I want to get up and superintend, and walk round with my hands in my pockets, and tell him what to do. It is my energetic nature. I can't help it. However, I did not say anything, but started the packing. It seemed a longer job than I had thought it was going to be, but I got the bag finished at last, and I sat on it and strapped it. "Ain't you going to put the boots in?" said Harris. And I looked round, and found I had forgotten them. That's just like Harris. He couldn't have said a word until I'd got the bag shut and strapped, of course. And George laughed one of those irritating, senseless, chuckle-headed, crack-jawed laughs of his. They do make me so wild. I opened the bag and packed the boots in, and then, just as I was going to close it, a horrible idea occurred to me. Had I packed my toothbrush? I don't know how it is, but I never do know whether I've packed my toothbrush. My toothbrush is a thing that haunts me when I'm traveling, and makes my life a misery. I dream that I haven't packed it, and wake up in a cold perspiration, and get out of bed and hunt for it. And, in the morning, I pack it before I have used it, and have to unpack again to get it, and it is always the last thing I turn out of the bag, and then I repack and forget it, and have to rush upstairs for it at the last moment and carry it to the railway station, wrapped up in my pocket handkerchief. Of course I had to turn every mortal thing out now, and, of course, I could not find it. I rummaged the things up into much the same state that they must have been before the world was created, and when chaos reigned. Of course, I found George's and Harris's 18 times over, but I couldn't find my own. I put the things back one by one, and held everything up and shook it. Then I found it inside a boot. I repacked once more. When I had finished, George asked if the soap was in. I said I didn't care a hang whether the soap was in or whether it wasn't, and I slammed the bag to and strapped it, and found that I had packed my tobacco pouch in it, and had to reopen it. It got shut up finally at 10:05 p.m., and then there remained the hampers to do. Harris said that we should be wanting to start in less than 12 hours' time, and thought that he and George had better do the rest, and I agreed and sat down, and they had a go. They began in a light-hearted spirit, evidently intending to show me how to do it. I made no comment, I only waited. When George is hanged, Harris will be the worst packer in this world, and I looked at the piles of plates and cups, and kettles, and bottles and jars, and pies, and stoves, and cakes, and tomatoes, and felt that the thing would soon become exciting. It did. They started with breaking a cup. That was the first thing they did. They did that just to show you what they could do, and to get you interested. Then Harris packed the strawberry jam on top of a tomato and squashed it, and they had to pick out the tomato with a teaspoon. And then it was George's turn, and he trod on the butter. I didn't say anything, but I came over and sat on the edge of the table and watched them. It irritated them more than anything I could have said. I felt that. It made them nervous and excited, and they stepped on things, and put things behind them, and then couldn't find them when they wanted them, and they packed the pies at the bottom, and put heavy things on top, and smashed the pies in. They upset salt over everything, and as for the butter, I never saw two men do more with 1 and 2pence worth of butter in my whole life than they did. After George had got it off his slipper, they tried to put it in the kettle. It wouldn't go in, and what was in wouldn't come out. They did scrape it out at last, and put it down on a chair, and Harris sat on it, and it stuck to him, and they went looking for it all over the room. "I'll take my oath I put it down on that chair," said George, staring at the empty seat. "I saw you do it myself, not a minute ago," said Harris. Then they started round the room again looking for it, and then they met again in the center, and stared at one another. "Most extraordinary thing I ever heard of," said George. "So mysterious," said Harris. Then George got round at the back of Harris and saw it. "Why, here it is all the time," he exclaimed, indignantly. "Where?" cried Harris, spinning round. "Stand still, can't you?" roared George, flying after him. And they got it off, and packed it in the teapot. Montmorency wasn't it all, of course. Montmorency's ambition in life is to get in the way and be sworn at. If he can squirm in anywhere where he particularly is not wanted, and be a perfect nuisance, and make people mad, and have things thrown at his head, then he feels his day has not been wasted. To get somebody to stumble over him, and curse him steadily for an hour, is his highest aim and object, and, when he has succeeded in accomplishing this, his conceit becomes quite unbearable. He came and sat down on things, just when they were wanted to be packed, and he labored under the fixed belief that, whenever Harris or George reached out their hand for anything, it was his cold, damp nose that they wanted. He put his leg into the jam, and he worried the teaspoons, and he pretended that the lemons were rats, and got into the hamper and killed 3 of them before Harris could land him with the frying pan. Harris said I encouraged him. I didn't encourage him. A dog like that don't want any encouragement. It's the natural, original sin that is born in him that makes him do things like that. The packing was done at 12:50, and Harris sat on the big hamper, and said he hoped nothing would be found broken. George said that if anything was broken it was broken, which reflection seemed to comfort him. He also said he was ready for bed. We were all ready for bed. Harris was to sleep with us that night, and we went upstairs. We tossed for beds, and Harris had to sleep with me. He said, "Do you prefer the inside or the outside, Jay?" I said I generally preferred to sleep inside a bed. Harris said it was old. George said, "What time shall I wake you fellows?" Harris said, 7. I said, "No 6, because I wanted to write some letters." Harris and I had a bit of a row over it, but at last split the difference, and said 6:30. "Wake us at 6:30, George," we said. George made no answer, and we found, on going over, that he had been asleep for some time, so we placed the bath where he could tumble into it on getting out in the morning, and went to bed ourselves. Chapter 5. Read by Long Stories for Sleep. Mrs. P. arouses us. George, the sluggard. The weather forecast swindle. Our luggage. Depravity of the small boy. The people gather round us. We drive off in great style, and arrive at Waterloo. Innocence of southwestern officials concerning such worldly things as trains. We are afloat in an open boat. It was Mrs. Poppets that woke me up next morning. She said, "Do you know that it's nearly 9 o'clock, sir?" 9:00 what? I cried, starting up. 9 o'clock, she replied, through the keyhole. I thought you was oversleeping yourselves. I woke Harris, and told him. He said, "I thought you wanted to get up at 6. "So I did," I answered. "Why didn't you wake me?" "How could I wake you, when you didn't wake me?" he retorted. Now we shan't get on the water till after 12. I wonder you take the trouble to get up at all. I replied, lucky for you that I do. If I hadn't woke you, you'd have lain there for the whole fortnight. We snarled at one another in this strain for the next few minutes, when we were interrupted by a defiant snore from George. It reminded us, for the first time since our being called, of his existence. There he lay, the man who had wanted to know what time he should wake us, on his back, with his mouth wide open, and his knees stuck up. I don't know why it should be, I am sure, but the sight of another man asleep in bed when I am up, maddens me. It seems to me so shocking to see the precious hours of a man's life, the priceless moments that will never come back to him again, being wasted in mere brutish sleep. There was George, throwing away in hideous sloth the inestimable gift of time, his valuable life, every second of which he would have to account for hereafter, passing away from him, unused. He might have been up stuffing himself with eggs and bacon, irritating the dog, or flirting with the slavey, instead of sprawling there, sunk in soul-clogging oblivion. It was a terrible thought. Harris and I appeared to be struck by it at the same instant. We determined to save him, and, in this noble resolve, our own dispute was forgotten. We flew across and slung the clothes off him, and Harris landed him one with a slipper, and I shouted in his ear, and he awoke. "Wassermauer," he observed, sitting up. "Get up, you fat-headed chunk," roared Harris. "It's 10:15. "What?" he shrieked, jumping out of bed into the bath. "Who the thunder put this thing here?" We told him he must have been a fool not to see the bath. We finished dressing, and, when it came to the extras, we remembered that we had packed the toothbrushes and the brush and comb. That toothbrush of mine will be the death of me, I know, and we had to go downstairs, and fish them out of the bag. And when we had done that, George wanted the shaving tackle. We told him that he would have to go without shaving that morning, as we weren't going to unpack that bag again for him, nor for anyone like him. He said, "Don't be absurd. How can I go into the city like this?" It was certainly rather rough on the city, but what cared we for human suffering? As Harris said, in his common, vulgar way, the city would have to lump it. We went downstairs to breakfast. Montmorency had invited 2 other dogs to come and see him off, and they were whiling away the time by fighting on the doorstep. We calmed them with an umbrella, and sat down to chops and cold beef. Harris said, "The great thing is to make a good breakfast," and he started with a couple of chops, saying that he would take these while they were hot, as the beef could wait. George got hold of the paper, and read us out the boating fatalities, and the weather forecast, which latter prophesied rain, cold, wet to fine, whatever more than usually ghastly thing in weather that may be, occasional local thunderstorms, east wind, with general depression over the Midland counties, London and Channel. Bar. Falling. I do think that, of all the silly, irritating tomfoolishness by which we are plagued, this weather forecast fraud is about the most aggravating. It forecasts precisely what happened yesterday or the day before, and precisely the opposite of what is going to happen today. I remember a holiday of mine being completely ruined one late autumn by our paying attention to the weather report of the local newspaper. Heavy showers, with thunderstorms, may be expected today, it would say on Monday, and so we would give up our picnic, and stop indoors all day, waiting for the rain. And people would pass the house, going off in wagonettes and coaches as jolly and merry as could be, the sun shining out, and not a cloud to be seen. "Ah," we said, as we stood looking out at them through the window, "won't they come home soaked?" And we chuckled to think how wet they were going to get, and came back and stirred the fire, and got our books, and arranged our specimens of seaweed and cockle shells. By 12 o'clock, With the sun pouring into the room, the heat became quite oppressive, and we wondered when those heavy showers and occasional thunderstorms were going to begin. "Ah, they'll come in the afternoon, you'll find," we said to each other. "Oh, won't those people get wet? What a lark!" At 1 o'clock, the landlady would come in to ask if we weren't going out, as it seemed such a lovely day. "No, no," we replied, with a knowing chuckle, "not we. We don't mean to get wet, no, no." And when the afternoon was nearly gone, and still there was no sign of rain, we tried to cheer ourselves up with the idea that it would come down all at once, just as the people had started for home, and were out of the reach of any shelter, and that they would thus get more drenched than ever. But not a drop ever fell, and it finished a grand day, and a lovely night after it. The next morning we would read that it was going to be a warm, fine to set fair day, much heat, and we would dress ourselves in flimsy things, and go out, and, half an hour after we had started, it would commence to rain hard, and a bitterly cold wind would spring up, and both would keep on steadily for the whole day, and we would come home with colds and rheumatism all over us, and go to bed. The weather is a thing that is beyond me altogether. I never can understand it. The barometer is useless, it is as misleading as the newspaper forecast. There was one hanging up in a hotel at Oxford at which I was staying last spring, and, when I got there, it was pointing to set fair. It was simply pouring with rain outside, and had been all day, and I couldn't quite make matters out. I tapped the barometer, and it jumped up and pointed to very dry. The Boots stopped as he was passing, and said he expected it meant tomorrow. I fancied that maybe it was thinking of the week before last, but Boots said, no, he thought not. I tapped it again the next morning, and it went up still higher, and the rain came down faster than ever. On Wednesday I went and hit it again, and the pointer went round towards set fair, very dry, and much heat, until it was stopped by the peg, and couldn't go any further. It tried its best, but the instrument was built so that it couldn't prophesy fine weather any harder than it did without breaking itself. It evidently wanted to go on, and prognosticate drought, and water famine, and sunstroke, and simoms, and such things, but the peg prevented it, and it had to be content with pointing to the mere commonplace very dry. Meanwhile, the rain came down in a steady torrent, and the lower part of the town was under water, owing to the river having overflowed. Boots said it was evident that we were going to have a prolonged spell of grand weather some time, and read out a poem which was printed over the top of the oracle, about long foretold, long last, short notice, soon past. The fine weather never came that summer. I expect that machine must have been referring to the following spring. Then there are those new style of barometers, the long straight ones. I never can make head or tail of those. There is one side for 10 a.m. yesterday, and one side for 10 a.m. today, but you can't always get there as early as 10, you know. It rises or falls for rain and fine, with much or less wind, and one end is NLY, and the other Ely. What's Ely got to do with it? And if you tap it, it doesn't tell you anything. And you've got to correct it to sea level, and reduce it to Fahrenheit, and even then I don't know the answer. But who wants to be foretold the weather? It is bad enough when it comes, without our having the misery of knowing about it beforehand. The prophet we like is the old man who, on the particularly gloomy-looking morning of some day when we particularly want it to be fine, looks round the horizon with a particularly knowing eye, and says, "Oh no, sir, I think it will clear up all right. It will break all right enough, sir." "Ah, he knows," we say, as we wish him good morning, and start off. Wonderful how these old fellows can tell. And we feel an affection for that man which is not at all lessened by the circumstances of its not clearing up, but continuing to rain steadily all day. Ah, well, we feel, he did his best. For the men that prophesies us bad weather, on the contrary, we entertain only bitter and revengeful thoughts. Going to clear up, d'ye think, we shout, cheerily, as we pass. Well, no, sir, I'm afraid it's settled down for the day, he replies, shaking his head. Stupid old fool, we mutter, what's he know about it? And, if his portent proves correct, we come back feeling still more angry against him, and with a vague notion that, somehow or other, he has had something to do with it. It was too bright and sunny on this especial morning for George's blood-curdling readings about bar. Falling, atmospheric disturbance, passing in an oblique line over southern Europe, and pressure increasing, to very much upset us, and so, finding that he could not make us wretched, and was only wasting his time, he sneaked the cigarette that I had carefully rolled up for myself, and went. Then Harris and I, having finished up the few things left on the table, carted out our luggage onto the doorstep, and waited for a cab. There seemed a good deal of luggage, when we put it all together. There was the Gladstone and the small handbag, and the 2 hampers, and a large roll of rugs, and some 4 or 5 overcoats and mackintoshes, and a few umbrellas, and then there was a melon by itself in a bag, because it was too bulky to go in anywhere, and a couple of pounds of grapes in another bag, and a Japanese paper umbrella, and a frying pan, which, being too long to pack, we had wrapped round with brown paper. It did look a lot, and Harris and I began to feel rather ashamed of it, though why we should be, I can't see. No cab came by, but the street boys did, and got interested in the show, apparently, and stopped. Biggs's boy was the first to come round. Biggs is our greengrocer, and his chief talent lies in securing the services of the most abandoned and unprincipled errand boys that civilization has as yet produced. If anything more than usually villainous in the boy line crops up in our neighborhood, we know that it is Biggs's latest. I was told that, at the time of the great Coram Street murder, it was promptly concluded by our street that Biggs's boy, for that period, was at the bottom of it, and had he not been able, in reply to the severe cross-examination to which he was subjected by number 19, when he called there for orders the morning after the crime, assisted by number 21, who happened to be on the step at the time, to prove a complete alibi, it would have gone hard with him. I didn't know Biggs's boy at that time, but, from what I have seen of them since, I should not have attached much importance to that alibi myself. Biggs's boy, as I have said, came round the corner. He was evidently in a great hurry when he first dawned upon the vision, but, on catching sight of Harris and me, and Montmorency, and the things, he eased up and stared. Harris and I frowned at him. This might have wounded a more sensitive nature, but Biggs's boys are not, as a rule, touchy. He came to a dead stop, a yard from our step, and, leaning up against the railings, and selecting a straw to chew, fixed us with his eye. He evidently meant to see this thing out. In another moment, the grocer's boy passed on the opposite side of the street. Biggs's boy hailed him. "Hi. Ground floor 042's A moving." The grocer's boy came across, and took up a position on the other side of the step. Then the young gentleman from the boot shop stopped, and joined Biggs's boy, while the empty-can superintendent from the Blue Posts took up an independent position on the curb. "They ain't going to starve, are they?" said the gentleman from the boot shop. "Ah. You'd want to take a thing or two with you," retorted the Blue Posts, "if you was going to cross the Atlantic in a small boat." "They ain't going to cross the Atlantic," struck in Biggs's boy, "they're going to find Stanley." By this time, quite a small crowd had collected, and people were asking each other what was the matter. One party, the young and giddy portion of the crowd, held that it was a wedding, and pointed out Harris as the bridegroom, while the elder and more thoughtful among the populace inclined to the idea that it was a funeral, and that I was probably the corpse's brother. At last, an empty cab turned up. It is a street where, as a rule, and when they are not wanted, empty cabs pass at the rate of 3 a minute, and hang about, and get in your way, and packing ourselves and our belongings into it, and shooting out a couple of Montmorency's friends, who had evidently sworn never to forsake him, we drove away amidst the cheers of the crowd, Biggs's boy shying a carrot after us for luck. We got to Waterloo at 11, and asked where the 11:05 started from. Of course nobody knew. Nobody at Waterloo ever does know where a train is going to start from, or where a train when it does start is going to, or anything about it. The porter who took our things thought it would go from number 2 platform, while another porter, with whom he discussed the question, had heard a rumor that it would go from number 1. The station master, on the other hand, was convinced it would start from the local. To put an end to the matter, we went upstairs, and asked the traffic superintendent, and he told us that he had just met a man, who said he had seen it at number 3 platform. We went to number 3 platform, but the authorities there said that they rather thought the train was the Southampton Express, or else the Windsor Loop. But they were sure it wasn't the Kingston train, though why they were sure it wasn't they couldn't say. Then our porter said he thought that must be it on the high-level platform, said he thought he knew the train. So we went to the high-level platform, and saw the engine driver, and asked him if he was going to Kingston. He said he couldn't say for certain of course, but that he rather thought he was. Anyhow, if he wasn't the 11.5 for Kingston, he said he was pretty confident he was the 9.32 for Virginia Water, or the 10 a.m. express for the Isle of Wight, or somewhere in that direction, and we should all know when we got there. We slipped half a crown into his hand, and begged him to be the 11.5 for Kingston. Nobody will ever know, on this line, we said, what you are, or where you're going. You know the way, you slip off quietly and go to Kingston. Well, I don't know, gents, replied the noble fellow, but I suppose some train's got to go to Kingston, and I'll do it. Gimme the half-crown. Thus we got to Kingston by the London and South Western Railway. We learnt, afterwards, that the train we had come by was really the Exeter Mail, and that they had spent hours at Waterloo, looking for it, and nobody knew what had become of it. Our boat was waiting for us at Kingston just below bridge, and to it we wended our way, and round it we stored our luggage, and into it we stepped. Are you all right, sir? Said the man. Right it is, we answered, and with Harris at the sculls and I at the tiller lines, and Montmorency, unhappy and deeply suspicious, in the prow, out we shot onto the waters which, for a fortnight, were to be our home. Chapter 6. Kingston. Instructive remarks on early English history. Instructive observations on carved oak and life in general. Sad case of Stivings, Jr. Musings on antiquity. I forget that I am steering. Interesting result. Hampton Court Maze. Harris as a guide. It was a glorious morning, late spring, or early summer, as you care to take it, when the dainty sheen of grass and leaf is blushing to a deeper green, and the year seems like a fair young maid, trembling with strange, wakening pulses on the brink of womanhood. The quaint back streets of Kingston, where they came down to the water's edge, looked quite picturesque in the flashing sunlight, the glinting river with its drifting barges, the wooded towpath, the trim-kept villas on the other side, Harris, in a red and orange blazer, grunting away at the sculls, the distant glimpses of the grey old palace of the Tudors, all made a sunny picture, so bright but calm, so full of life, and yet so peaceful, that, early in the day though it was, I felt myself being dreamily lulled off into a musing fit. I mused on Kingston, or Kyningeston, as it was once called in the days when Saxon kings were crowned there. Great Caesar crossed the river there, and the Roman legions camped upon its sloping uplands. Caesar, like, in later years, Elizabeth, seems to have stopped everywhere, only he was more respectable than good Queen Bess. He didn't put up at the public houses. She was nuts on public houses, was England's Virgin Queen. There's scarcely a pub of any attractions within 10 miles of London that she does not seem to have looked in at, or stopped at, or slept at, some time or other. I wonder now, supposing Harris, say, turned over a new leaf, and became a great and good man, and got to be Prime Minister, and died, if they would put up signs over the public houses that he had patronized. Harris had a glass of bitter in this house. Harris had 2 of Scotch cold here in the summer of '88. Harris was chucked from here in December, 1886. No, there would be too many of them. It would be the houses that he had never entered that would become famous. Only house in South London that Harris never had a drink in. The people would flock to it to see what could have been the matter with it. How poor weak-minded King Edwy must have hated Kyning Eston. The coronation feast had been too much for him. Maybe boar's head stuffed with sugar plums did not agree with him. It wouldn't with me, I know, and he had had enough of sack and mead, so he slipped from the noisy revel to steal a quiet moonlight hour with his beloved Elgiva. Perhaps, from the casement, standing hand in hand, they were watching the calm moonlight on the river, while from the distant halls the boisterous revelry floated in broken bursts of faint-heard din and tumult. Then brutal Odo and St. Dunstan forced their rude way into the quiet room, and hurl coarse insults at the sweet-faced queen, and drag poor Edwy back to the loud clamor of the drunken brawl. Years later, to the crash of battle music, Saxon kings and Saxon revelry were buried side by side, and Kingston's greatness passed away for a time, to rise once more when Hampton Court became the palace of the Tudors and the Stuarts, and the royal barges strained at their moorings on the river's bank, and bright-cloaked gallants swaggered down the water steps to cry, "What ferry, ho! Gadzooks, gramercy!" Many of the old houses, round about, speak very plainly of those days when Kingston was a royal borough, and nobles and courtiers lived there, near their king, and the long road to the palace gates was gay all day with clanking steel and prancing palfreys, and rustling silks and velvets, and fair faces. The large and spacious houses, with their oriel, latticed windows, their huge fireplaces, and their gabled roofs, breathe of the days of hose and doublet, of pearl-embroidered stomachers, and complicated oaths. They were upraised in the days when men knew how to build. The hard red bricks have only grown more firmly set with time, and their oak stairs do not creak and grunt when you try to go down them quietly. Speaking of oak staircases reminds me that there is a magnificent carved oak staircase in one of the houses in Kingston. It is a shop now, in the marketplace, but it was evidently once the mansion of some great personage. A friend of mine, who lives at Kingston, went in there to buy a hat one day, and, in a thoughtless moment, put his hand in his pocket and paid for it then and there. The shopman, he knows my friend, was naturally a little staggered at first, but, quickly recovering himself, and feeling that something ought to be done to encourage this sort of thing, asked our hero if he would like to see some fine old carved oak. My friend said he would, and the shopman, thereupon, took him through the shop, and up the staircase of the house. The balusters were a superb piece of workmanship, and the wall all the way up was oak-paneled, with carving that would have done credit to a palace. From the stairs, they went into the drawing-room, which was a large, bright room, decorated with a somewhat startling though cheerful paper of a blue ground. There was nothing, however, remarkable about the apartment, and my friend wondered why he had been brought there. The proprietor went up to the paper, and tapped it. It gave forth a wooden sound. "Oak," he explained. "All carved oak, right up to the ceiling, just the same as you saw on the staircase." "But, great Caesar! "Man," expostulated my friend, "you don't mean to say you have covered over carved oak with blue wallpaper?" "Yes," was the reply, "it was expensive work. Had to matchboard it all over first, of course. But the room looks cheerful now. It was awful gloomy before." I can't say I altogether blame the man, which is doubtless a great relief to his mind. From his point of view, which would be that of the average householder, desiring to take life as lightly as possible, and not that of the old curiosity shop maniac, there is reason on his side. Carved oak is very pleasant to look at, and to have a little of, but it is no doubt somewhat depressing to live in, for those whose fancy does not lie that way. It would be like living in a church. No, what was sad in his case was that he, who didn't care for carved oak, should have his drawing room paneled with it, while people who do care for it have to pay enormous prices to get it. It seems to be the rule of this world. Each person has what he doesn't want, and other people have what he does want. Married men have wives, and don't seem to want them, and young single fellows cry out that they can't get them. Poor people who can hardly keep themselves have 8 hearty children. Rich old couples, with no one to leave their money to, die childless. Then there are girls with lovers. The girls that have lovers never want them. They say they would rather be without them, that they bother them, and why don't they go and make love to Miss Smith and Miss Brown, who are plain and elderly, and haven't got any lovers? They themselves don't want lovers. They never mean to marry. It does not do to dwell on these things, it makes one so sad. There was a boy at our school, we used to call him Sandford and Merton. His real name was Stivings. He was the most extraordinary lad I ever came across. I believe he really liked study. He used to get into awful rows for sitting up in bed and reading Greek, and as for French irregular verbs there was simply no keeping him away from them. He was full of weird and unnatural notions about being a credit to his parents and an honor to the school, and he yearned to win prizes, and grow up and be a clever man, and had all those sorts of weak-minded ideas. I never knew such a strange creature, yet harmless, mind you, as the babe unborn. Well, that boy used to get ill about twice a week, so that he couldn't go to school. There never was such a boy to get ill as that Sandford and Merton. If there was any known disease going within 10 miles of him, he had it, and had it badly. He would take bronchitis in the dog days, and have hay fever at Christmas. After a 6 weeks period of drought, he would be stricken down with rheumatic fever, and he would go out in a November fog and come home with a sunstroke. They put him under laughing gas one year, poor lad, and drew all his teeth, and gave him a false set, because he suffered so terribly with toothache, and then it turned to neuralgia and earache. He was never without a cold, except once for 9 weeks while he had scarlet fever, and he always had chilblains. During the great cholera scare of 1871, our neighborhood was singularly free from it. There was only one reputed case in the whole parish. That case was young Stivings. He had to stop in bed when he was ill, and eat chicken and custards and hothouse grapes, and he would lie there and sob, because they wouldn't let him do Latin exercises, and took his German grammar away from him. And we other boys, who would have sacrificed 10 terms of our school life for the sake of being ill for a day, and had no desire whatever to give our parents any excuse for being stuck up about us, couldn't catch so much as a stiff neck. We fooled about in drafts, and it did us good, and freshened us up, and we took things to make us sick, and they made us fat, and gave us an appetite. Nothing we could think of seemed to make us ill until the holidays began. Then, on the breaking up day, we caught colds, and whooping cough, and all kinds of disorders, which lasted till the term recommenced, when, in spite of everything we could maneuver to the contrary, we would get suddenly well again, and be better than ever. Such is life, and we are but as grass that is cut down, and put into the oven and baked. To go back to the carved oak question, they must have had very fair notions of the artistic and the beautiful, our great-great-grandfathers. Why, all our art treasures of today are only the dug-up commonplaces of 300 or 400 years ago. I wonder if there is real intrinsic beauty in the old soup plates, beer mugs, and candle snuffers that we prize so now, or if it is only the halo of age glowing around them that gives them their charms in our eyes. The old blue that we hang about our walls as ornaments were the common everyday household utensils of a few centuries ago, and the pink shepherds and the yellow shepherdesses that we hand round now for all our friends to gush over, and pretend they understand, were the unvalued mantle ornaments that the mother of the 18th century would have given the baby to suck when he cried. Will it be the same in the future? Will the prized treasures of today always be the cheap trifles of the day before? Will rows of our willow-patterned dinner plates be ranged above the chimney pieces of the grate in the years 2000 and odd? Will the white cups with the gold rim and the beautiful gold flower inside, species unknown, that our Sarah Janes now break in sheer lightheartedness of spirit, be carefully mended, and stood upon a bracket, and dusted only by the lady of the house? That china dog that ornaments the bedroom of my furnished lodgings. It is a white dog. Its eyes blue. Its nose is a delicate red, with spots. Its head is painfully erect, its expression is amiability carried to verge of imbecility. I do not admire it myself. Considered as a work of art, I may say it irritates me. Thoughtless friends jeer at it, and even my landlady herself has no admiration for it, and excuses its presence by the circumstance that her aunt gave it to her. But in 200 years' time it is more than probable that that dog will be dug up from somewhere or other, minus its legs, and with its tail broken, and will be sold for old china, and put in a glass cabinet. And people will pass it round, and admire it. They will be struck by the wonderful depth of the color on the nose, and speculate as to how beautiful the bit of the tail that is lost no doubt was. We, in this age, do not see the beauty of that dog. We are too familiar with it. It is like the sunset and the stars, we are not awed by their loveliness because they are common to our eyes. So it is with that china dog. In 2288 people will gush over it. The making of such dogs will have become a lost art. Our descendants will wonder how we did it, and say how clever we were. We shall be referred to lovingly as those grand old artists that flourished in the 19th century, and produced those china dogs. The sampler that the eldest daughter did at school will be spoken of as tapestry of the Victorian era, and be almost priceless. The blue and white mugs of the present-day roadside inn will be hunted up, all cracked and chipped, and sold for their weight in gold, and rich people will use them for claret cups, and travelers from Japan will buy up all the presents from Ramsgate, and souvenirs of Margate, that may have escaped destruction, and take them back to Jeddo as ancient English curios. At this point Harris threw away the sculls, got up and left his seat, and sat on his back, and stuck his legs in the air. Montmorency howled, and turned a somersault, and the top hamper jumped up, and all the things came out. I was somewhat surprised, but I did not lose my temper. I said, pleasantly enough, "Hullo. What's that for? What's that for?" Why? No, on second thoughts, I will not repeat what Harris said. I may have been to blame, I admit it, but nothing excuses violence of language and coarseness of expression, especially in a man who has been carefully brought up, as I know Harris has been. I was thinking of other things, and forgot, as anyone might easily understand, that I was steering, and the consequence was that we had got mixed up a good deal with the towpath. It was difficult to say, for the moment, which was us and which was the Middlesex bank of the river, but we found out after a while, and separated ourselves. Harris, however, said he had done enough for a bit, and proposed that I should take a turn, so, as we were in, I got out and took the tow line, and ran the boat on past Hampton Court. What a dear old wall that is that runs along by the river there. I never pass it without feeling better for the sight of it. Such a mellow, bright, sweet old wall, what a charming picture it would make, with the lichen creeping here, and the moss growing there, a shy young vine peeping over the top at this spot, to see what is going on upon the busy river, and the sober old ivy clustering a little farther down. There are 50 shades and tints and hues in every 10 yards of that old wall. If I could only draw, and knew how to paint, I could make a lovely sketch of that old wall, I'm sure. I've often thought I should like to live at Hampton Court. It looks so peaceful and so quiet, and it is such a dear old place to ramble round in the early morning before many people are about. But, there, I don't suppose I should really care for it when it came to actual practice. It would be so ghastly dull and depressing in the evening, when your lamp cast uncanny shadows on the paneled walls, and the echo of distant feet rang through the cold stone corridors, and now drew nearer, and now died away, and all was death-like silence, save the beating of one's own heart. We are creatures of the sun, we men and women. We love light and life. That is why we crowd into the towns and cities, and the country grows more and more deserted every year. In the sunlight in the daytime, when nature is alive and busy all around us, we like the open hillsides and the deep woods well enough, but in the night, when our Mother Earth has gone to sleep, and left us waking, oh, the world seems so lonesome, and we get frightened, like children in a silent house. Then we sit and sob, and long for the gas-lit streets, and the sound of human voices, and the answering throb of human life. We feel so helpless and so little in the great stillness, when the dark trees rustle in the night wind. There are so many ghosts about, and their silent sighs make us feel so sad. Let us gather together in the great cities, and light huge bonfires of a million gas jets, and shout and sing together, and feel brave. Harris asked me if I'd ever been in the maze at Hampton Court. He said he went in once to show somebody else the way. He had studied it up in a map, and it was so simple that it seemed foolish, hardly worth the tuppence charged for admission. Harris said he thought that map must have been got up as a practical joke, because it wasn't a bit like the real thing, and only misleading. It was a country cousin that Harris took in. He said, "We'll just go in here, so that you can say you've been, but it's very simple. It's absurd to call it a maze. You keep on taking the first turning to the right. We'll just walk round for 10 minutes, and then go and get some lunch." They met some people soon after they had got inside, who said they had been there for 3/4 of an hour, and had had about enough of it. Harris told them they could follow him, if they liked, he was just going in, and then should turn round and come out again. They said it was very kind of him, and fell behind, and followed. They picked up various other people who wanted to get it over, as they went along, until they had absorbed all the persons in the maze. People who had given up all hopes of ever getting either in or out, or of ever seeing their home and friends again, plucked up courage at the sight of Harris and his party, and joined the procession, blessing him. Harris said he should judge there must have been 20 people, following him, in all, and one woman with a baby, who had been there all the morning, insisted on taking his arm, for fear of losing him. Harris kept on turning to the right, but it seemed a long way, and his cousin said he supposed it was a very big maze. "Oh, one of the largest in Europe," said Harris. "Yes, it must be," replied the cousin, "because we've walked a good 2 miles already." Harris began to think it rather strange himself, but he held on until, at last, they passed the half of a penny bun on the ground that Harris's cousin swore he had noticed there 7 minutes ago. Harris said, "Oh, impossible," but the woman with the baby said, "Not at all," as she herself had taken it from the child, and thrown it down there, just before she met Harris. She also added that she wished she never had met Harris, and expressed an opinion that he was an imposter. That made Harris mad, and he produced his map, and explained his theory. "The map may be all right enough," said one of the party, "if you know whereabouts in it we are now." Harris didn't know, and suggested that the best thing to do would be to go back to the entrance, and begin again. For the beginning again part of it there was not much enthusiasm, but with regard to the advisability of going back to the entrance there was complete unanimity, and so they turned, and trailed after Harris again, in the opposite direction. About 10 minutes more passed, and then they found themselves in the center. Harris thought at first of pretending that that was what he had been aiming at, but the crowd looked dangerous, and he decided to treat it as an accident. Anyhow, they had got something to start from then. They did know where they were, and the map was once more consulted, and the thing seemed simpler than ever, and off they started for the third time. And 3 minutes later they were back in the center again. After that, they simply couldn't get anywhere else. Whatever way they turned brought them back to the middle. It became so regular at length, that some of the people stopped there, and waited for the others to take a walk round, and come back to them. Harris drew out his map again, after a while, but the sight of it only infuriated the mob, and they told him to go and curl his hair with it. Harris said that he couldn't help feeling that, to a certain extent, he had become unpopular. They all got crazy at last, and sang out for the keeper, and the men came and climbed up the ladder outside, and shouted out directions to them. But all their heads were, by this time, in such a confused whirl that they were incapable of grasping anything, and so the men told them to stop where they were, and he would come to them. They huddled together, and waited, and he climbed down, and came in. He was a young keeper, as luck would have it, and new to the business, and when he got in, he couldn't find them, and he wandered about, trying to get to them, and then he got lost. They caught sight of him, every now and then, rushing about the other side of the hedge, and he would see them, and rush to get to them, and they would wait there for about 5 minutes, and then he would reappear again in exactly the same spot, and ask them where they had been. They had to wait till one of the old keepers came back from his dinner before they got out. Harris said he thought it was a very fine maze, so far as he was a judge, and we agreed that we would try to get George to go into it, on our way back. The end. 3 Men in a Boat Part 1 was read by Long Stories for Sleep. Next listen to 3 Men in a Boat Part 2. Thank you for listening. Good night.